And they didn't respect it. When he said it, it didn't mean anything. But now they know it meant a lot. And Mexico does what we tell them to do. And no room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
As Canada and the U.S. continue to navigate a new reality in regards to their trading relationship, Ottawa is seeking to improve trading relationships with other countries, including Mexico.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said on Wednesday that she and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had agreed to strengthen trade collaboration, particularly in light of the tariffs from U.S. President Donald
Trump believed he had the ideal strategy: put Canada and Mexico up against each other, erode their willpower, and make them submit to Washington's demands. However, something much more hazardous for the White House occurred rather than splintering. In silence, the two neighbors clasped hands. The evidence arrived in Mexico City on September 19, 2025. Together, President Claudia Sheinbaum and Prime Minister Mark Carney signed a broad, all-encompassing strategic alliance. This handshake wasn't your typical diplomatic one. It was an agreement that covered energy, trade, and even security. The incident seemed to many in Washington like a diplomatic ambush, a retaliation that Trump's team had not anticipated. The Mexican press presented it as a shield of sovereignty, while Canadian pundits immediately referred to it as a second NAFTA. That begs the question: was this the beginning of something even greater, or was this the day that North America ceased to revolve around the United States? An alliance created to contain America rather than work with it? Remember to use the like button before we begin. A simple like helps spread the word about this film to more people who should watch it. Washington was hardest hit by the aftershocks if the Canadian-Mexican collaboration was the shock. Instead of simply collapsing, Trump's tariff and threat-making strategy, particularly his decision to threaten Mexico's withdrawal from trade agreements, caused the exact thing he feared most: a united front forming just beyond America's borders. It couldn't have come at a worse time. The average tariff rate imposed by the United States by mid-October was 11.6%, the highest since 1943. For American companies, that figure wasn't a figure. It was a warning sign that flashed red across industrial floors and boardrooms. Economists at sea are called the change the biggest tax hike in a generation during the first 100 days of Trump's second term. And the reprisal was fast. In response, Canada and Mexico imposed 25% tariffs of their own, leaving shipments of steel, cars, and agricultural products from the United States stuck at ports with nowhere to go. U.S. Economic Intelligence Services started to calculate the price behind closed doors. Early estimates indicated that if the cycle of retribution persisted unchecked, over 400,000 American jobs may be at jeopardy. Before the dust settled, the issue that haunted Washington was not whether Trump's gambit would succeed but rather how much harm it may cause. Ottawa was already changing its strategy as Washington was frantically calculating the fallout. Prime Minister Mark Carney saw the situation as an opportunity to break free from previous reliance and create something new, rather than pursuing individual concessions with Trump. Carney has already drawn a line in the sand back in March 2025. Trump publicly declared that the U.S.-Canada relationship was ended after imposing a 25% tariff on Canadian automobiles. It was more than just rhetoric to many Canadians. It marked a sea change in the way the nation envisioned its future. Instead of pointing only south, that future now points east and west. Canada had depended on the United States to purchase almost 90% of its oil exports for many years. However, Carney's strategy redirects an estimated $38.5 billion in yearly energy flows to Asia and Europe. Additionally, Ottawa has advanced new pipeline projects that will provide LNG straight to markets in Northeast Asia and India, avoiding American channels completely. This change has been reflected in public opinion. More than 62% of Canadians, according to a recent Angus Reid study conducted in September 2025, are in favor of lessening economic reliance on the U.S. An obvious indication that Carney's disobedience is felt outside of the official buildings. Are you still here? To ensure that you don't miss the next thing, click the subscribe button. Mexico was doing its own calculations at the same time that Canada was laying out a plan to move away from U.S. reliance. They were just as strategic too. President Claudia Sheinbaum wanted more than just defense against Trump's trade threats. She saw an opportunity to work more closely with Ottawa rather than Washington in order to increase Mexico's influence throughout North America. The foundation was already in place. Mexico's exports to Asia saw double-digit growth in 2024 in countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines, providing the country with the logistical reach and confidence to diversify even more. Building on this momentum, ports like Veracruz and Manzano were named important transit hubs for Canadian agricultural and energy products, so turning Mexico into a link between Canadian supply and demand worldwide. At the same time, Mexico City started to establish itself as a new entry point for Canadian goods into Latin America, providing a different trade route that completely avoided U.S. regulation. In speeches, Sheinbaum's administration presented this alliance as a safeguard for Mexican workers against the unpredictable nature of U.S. policies, in addition to being an act of economic pragmatism. Thus, Mexico's shift was similar to Canada's, transforming what appeared to be Washington pressure into a chance to reshape the balance of power in the region. Infrastructure and security swiftly emerged as the cornerstones of this new cooperation if trade served as its foundation. Markets were no longer the only focus of the Canada-Mexico partnership. It was developing into a structural counterweight that was discreetly challenging U.S. dominance, what some analysts referred to as a soft wall. An ambitious energy corridor that would directly connect Alberta's resources to the Gulf of Mexico was announced. Mexico, establishing a supply corridor that runs north-south and might get around conventional U.S. constraints. Simultaneously, a collaborative port development was announced in Baja California to handle Canadian LNG imports to Asia. It meant more reach for Canada. It meant Mexico would become a vital center in the world's energy flows. However, the collaboration went beyond business. With a purposeful departure from Washington-dominated frameworks, Ottawa and Mexico City initiated a new security conversation to coordinate operations against transnational crime. Additionally, the United States was excluded from a long-controlled procedure when the two nations struck an agreement to directly share customs data. Together, these actions demonstrated that the partnership had lost its symbolic meaning. For a North America that could operate without the U.S., it was turning into an operational design. The United States found itself absorbing the economic shockwaves of its own policy while Canada and Mexico were busy creating new avenues for collaboration. What was supposed to hurt America's neighbors instead turned inward, hurting American businesses and households. The retaliatory actions alone were expected to reduce U.S. GDP by up to $75 billion over the medium term, according to IMF estimates published in February 2025. Economists' high-risk scenarios suggest that the impact might be much more severe, with a 2.1% reduction by 2026. With an almost 12% decline in manufacturing production. In daily life, the pressure was already apparent. In 2025, inflation increased by a further 3 to 1, 8 percentage points, which resulted in increased expenses for American households. Annual costs are even higher, at 1 thyrishimmer to 1. For many, it meant that any benefits they had received from previous salary increases or tax cuts would be diminished. Wall Street responded with a decision of its own. Concerns that the trade war was turning into a wider economic drag grew as the Dow Jones fell 8% in only 3 weeks after the initial tariff package was introduced, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. The figures indicated that Washington's policies were undermining confidence at home rather than demonstrating power overseas. The political climate in North America was already starting to shift as the economic pressure in the U.S. increased. What at first appeared to be a short-term modification of Trump's tariffs was evolving into a more significant, purposeful restructuring of the regional order. It was no longer believed that the Canada-Mexico Pact was a reactive shield. It was becoming the cornerstone of an alternative system that was intended to curtail Washington's power to set the rules. When Ottawa and Mexico City announced a new consultation structure that will meet every 6 months and specifically excludes the U.S., they made the point very clear. Although it appeared symbolic at first, it actually signaled a change in the way decisions would be coordinated. It implied that two of America's closest neighbors were ready to jointly decide on policy without waiting for Washington's assent, something that had not happened in decades. Leaders in business quickly adjusted. Companies from Canada and Mexico started covertly assembling cross-border supply chains that completely circumvented the U.S. Agricultural products, pharmaceuticals, and vital minerals were the first industries to shift. However, analysts said that energy equipment and technologies might come next. This was not merely a diversion of trade. It was the real-time architecture of a new industrial ecosystem. The realignment was observed with exceptional rapidity outside of North America. Both Japan and the European Union sent exploratory delegations as a buffer against U.S. uncertainty, not because they were devoted to Canada or Mexico. Their interests suggested that the alliance may be a springboard for more extensive collaboration, attracting allies who prioritized peace above conflict. North America found itself at a real crossroads for the first time in its history. Two paths, one connected to Washington's well-known orbit and the other toward a framework in which the U.S. may be viewed less as the focal point and more as a single actor among many. Trump's divide and rule approach has had the opposite effect of strengthening American influence. On Washington's doorstep, a cohesive front is emerging. Brookings analysts have already cautioned that the United States may lose its position as a regional conductor if this trend persists. Formerly seen as junior partners are now establishing themselves as an alternative group that can chart its own path in security, agriculture, and energy. The ramifications are not limited to North America. This reorganization may have an impact on broader frameworks, like as APEC and the CPTPP, indicating that what started out as a tactical reaction to tariffs may develop into a more extensive change in global alliances. Thus, the issue remains, has Washington made it possible for North America to stop centered on the U.S. by its own tariff policy? And with that, we arrive at the larger picture. What does it say about America's capacity to lead in a time of shifting alliances if Canada and Mexico are able to create a parallel order out of what was intended to be pressure? Is this the first indication that North America's gravitational center is beginning to shift? If this video made you think, please like and subscribe to help fund future videos like this one. Thank you.